Welcome to another mentoring moment with Dr. Mo. I'm Dr. Mo, and in this mentoring moment, we will elevate and enhance your tapping practice by taking a deep dive into SUDs and the VOC scale. So in this video, two main takeaways are to be able to distinguish the difference between the two scales, and of course, how to properly use them in sessions with your clients to be able to gauge their progress a bit more effectively. Okay, so let's dive right in and talk about subjective units of distress, which is abbreviated as SUDs. So this scale was developed in 1982, and it was created as a 10-point scale that was used to measure participants' or clients' present level of distress. So it has this aura of negativity around it because it is meant to measure things that are uncomfortable and distressing to the client. So negative intensity, if you will. And initially, this scale was used primarily to measure anxiety. However, in EFT and in other modalities that use this SUD scale, it is used to measure other emotions, other forms of intensity other than anxiety. For instance, in your sessions, you will be using the SUD scale to measure an emotion, a body sensation, the intensity of a particular aspect, or a presenting issue or problem that your client is facing. Essentially, anything that makes your client feel uncomfortable in the session will likely be gauged using the SUD scale. So the higher the subjective unit of distress, the closer it is to 10, is the more intense, the more distressing for the client. And your goal as a practitioner is to facilitate a session, a tapping round, some sort of technique that reduces that intensity, whether it is for an emotion, body sensation, an aspect, or an overall issue, to be as close to zero as possible. So the SUD scale is pretty straightforward. However, the validity of cognition scale, or the VOC scale, is kind of a bit more nuanced. So it was actually developed by Dr. Francine Shapiro in 1991. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with Dr. Shapiro, she was the one who created EMDR. And so the VOC scale came from her sessions and her research into the EMDR field. And I will preface this by saying that the VOC scale used in EMDR as Shapiro created it and the VOC scale used in EFT are a little bit different. But let's kind of look at what Dr. Shapiro created, because that's where we got our framework from. So let's give her an honorary mention here in her research. So it was initially created for belief in a positive self-statement that clients were asked to repeat during a session. And this scale, it was originally on a scaling of 1 to 7, with 1 being totally not true and 7 being totally true. So how true their belief was in this positive statement that they were encouraged to repeat. Okay, so that was in EMDR framework, and now we're looking at VOC in the EFT framework, and there are bits and pieces that are very similar, but there are also some major differences. So rather than a scale going from 1 to 7, the VOC scale in EFT goes from a 0 to a 10, similarly as the SUD scale ranges from 0 to 10. Whereas, we saw here in this slide, the VOC scale was created to measure the belief in a positive self-statement. However, in EFT, you can use the VOC scale to basically gauge your client's belief of any statement, affirmation, goal, core belief, limiting belief, any writing on the walls that is consolidated into a terse statement, a tail ender also, regardless of whether that statement is positive or negative. We're just looking at how true that is to your client and how true it feels to the client. Okay, so in the VOC scale, the closer to 10 means that that statement, whether it's positive or negative, holds the most truth to the client. They believe it the most. They believe it to be true in their life. And so the goal, as a practitioner, your goal could be to increase that VOC. You could be wanting to facilitate the session to be able to increase the belief in that particular statement, or you can also be facilitating a session in order to help your client achieve a less intense VOC, one that is closer to 0. So let's do some examples because it can kind of be a little confusing as to, okay, when do I want to increase the VOC? When do I want to decrease it? Okay, so let's do some examples. So this first statement here, I am a terrible, worthless artist. So when you hear that as a practitioner, this sounds like a limiting belief. It sounds like the writing on the walls of your client's mind palace. So you would ask your client, okay, how true is this limiting belief 0 to 10, with 10 being the most true for you? So notice we're using the VOC scale to track this negative limiting belief and see how true that tracks for your client, okay? Let's move on to the next one. The world is not safe. So this is kind of a classic core belief, and it's a negative one. So similarly as the limiting belief before, we would ask, how true does this core belief feel to you on a scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being the most true? So let's say your client says, oh, this feels like an 8 out of 10 true. So facilitating a session, getting to specific events that support this idea that the world is not safe, you'd ask your client again at the end of the session, how true does this statement feel to you now that we've done some work on it? The world is not safe. And let's say your client says, oh, it feels about a VOC of 5 out of 10. Right? It doesn't feel as true as before because as you inch toward 0, it means that it doesn't hold that much truth anymore. And that's good. In this case, we want to decrease the truth of this statement because it is so negative, right? Okay, next example, I am worthy. So this is a core belief, and it is a positive one. So what we'd like to do is to raise that truth, the truth of this statement, to be a 10 out of 10 eventually, whether that client is working with you to achieve it or experiencing other modalities. That's our goal for this client. So you would ask them, okay, when you repeat this belief, I am worthy, how true does that feel to you 0 to 10, with 10 being the most true? Let's say they say, it feels like a 3 out of 10. From that number, as a practitioner, you recognize, okay, they don't believe it. They don't feel this belief to be true in their life. So the goal of your work together is to increase that core belief to be at a 10 out of 10 true, eventually. And so we've done a lot of examples of core beliefs, limiting beliefs. Let's take an example of a goal, because you can also use VOC scale to measure a SMART goal. So this example, I wake up at 5 a.m. every day and hit the gym. Right? So this is a SMART goal, and you ask your client using the VOC scale, instead of asking them how true does this feel, which you can also say, you can ask how possible does this goal feel for you, right? You're kind of gauging the possibility of how this statement could play out in their life. Okay, how possible is it for them to actually show up at 5 a.m. and go to the gym, right? So it can measure truth and it can measure possibility of change. So let's say they say it feels like a 5 out of 10 possible. Okay, so your goal would, as a practitioner, would be to increase that possibility to a 10 out of 10, meaning that 10 out of 10 is like it's going to happen, no doubt about it, right? The closer it is to 0 in this example, the more doubt there is at the possibility that this goal will be achieved. Okay? So I really do hope that these examples have been helpful to you and you are now better able to use the SUD scale and the VOC scale in your sessions with your clients. If you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment below, or you can even sign up for my mentoring Patreon, where I give one-on-one advice and guidance to EFT practitioners. So if that resonates with you, all the details are in the description box below, and we will talk and tap soon. Bye.